The Roman Empire. We think of magnificent roads stretching across continents, legions marching in perfect formation, and emperors draped in purple, ruling over a vast domain. Our history books are filled with their stories of epic battles, cunning politics, and glorious triumphs. We see the Colosseum, the Pantheon, the aqueducts, and we marvel at a civilization that shaped the Western world. But this is only one side of the story. Behind the gleaming marble facades and within the opulent villas of the elite, there existed a shadow world, a world of silent suffering that history often forgets to mention. In this hidden world, some of the most tragic figures were children. Not the children of emperors or senators, but those who were vulnerable, those who were taken from their homes and their families. These were children who found themselves thrust into the complex and often brutal households of the powerful. Imagine being a child, ripped away from everything you ever could known, your parents, your friends, your language, and placed into a strange new world where you are no longer a person, but property. Your name is changed, your past is erased, and your future is decided for you. These children, known in Latin as verni, were born into servitude within a household, or favored but unfree. Playthings for their masters, their lives were a paradox. On one hand, they might be educated, dressed in fine clothes, and live in luxurious surroundings that most freeborn poor could only dream of. They were often close companions to the master's own children, sharing lessons, games, and meals. To an outsider, they might have looked like part of the family, but this illusion of belonging was fragile. Their value was tied directly to their youth, their charm, and their ability to please their owners. They had no rights, no real freedom. An affectionate gesture from a master could be a genuine sign of care, or it could be a reminder of their complete powerlessness. The constant pressure to be pleasing, to be perfect, was immense. A single mistake, a moment of defiance, or simply the inevitable process of growing up, could shatter their privileged position in an instant. As they grew older, the path ahead became uncertain and often perilous. The affection they received as children could curdle into something far more exploitative as they entered adolescence. The master who once treated them as a favored child could begin to see them in a different light, and they had no legal power to refuse or resist. Their supposed special status offered them no protection. For boys, the end of their youth meant they might be cast aside, sold off, or relegated to more menial, back-breaking labor. For girls, their future was often tied to the desires of the men in the household. While some might have been granted their freedom later in life, many were not, and even for those who were freed, the psychological scars remained. How do you build a life for yourself when your entire identity has been shaped by servitude? How do you form healthy relationships when your earliest experiences of affection were tangled with ownership and control? These are the questions that don't appear in the grand narratives of Roman conquests and glory. The lives of these children are a somber and crucial part of Roman history. They force us to look beyond the monuments and the military victories and see the human cost of that empire. Their stories are not here to simply shock us. They're here to remind us that behind every great power, there are forgotten voices and hidden truths. By remembering them, we don't just learn about the past. We learn a timeless lesson about power, vulnerability, and the enduring importance of protecting every child's right to freedom, identity, and a future of their own choosing. Let's talk about a term from ancient Rome: Catamite. You might have come across this word in historical texts or discussions about the Roman Empire, and it's important to understand its true, and quite frankly, disturbing meaning. In the language of ancient Rome, Catamite referred specifically to young male slaves. These weren't just any young men. They were boys, often very young, who were owned by wealthy, powerful men, including rulers and members of the elite. It's crucial to grasp the social context here. These boys were not free citizens. They were legally considered property, much like a piece of furniture or an animal. This meant they had absolutely no personal freedom or legal rights. They couldn't say no. They couldn't refuse any command. And they had no power to consent or dissent. Their lives were entirely under the control of their owners, from the moment they woke up to the moment they went to sleep. The relationship between an owner and a Catamite was one of absolute power and domination. The owner held complete authority over the boy's body and life. This wasn't a relationship between equals, nor was it a mentorship or an apprenticeship as some might mistakenly believe. It was a system of ownership where one human being was treated as a possession by another. These boys were often taken from their families, sometimes as spoils of war or through the slave trade, and forced into this life. They had no support system, no one to turn to for help, and no path to freedom. When we look at this historical practice through a modern lens, with our contemporary understanding of human rights, ethics, and child psychology, the conclusion is clear and unavoidable. What was happening to these young boys was a severe form of child exploitation and abuse. The lack of consent, the power imbalance, and the complete control exerted over a minor fits every definition of abuse that we recognize today. The system stripped these children of their dignity, their autonomy, and their childhood. It's easy to sometimes romanticize history or view the past through rose-tinted glasses, but practices like this remind us of the harsh realities that many people faced. Understanding the true meaning of Catamite isn't just a historical footnote, it's a sobering lesson. It shows us how vulnerable individuals, especially children, have been exploited throughout history when power structures allow it. By acknowledging the truth of this practice, we can better appreciate the progress we've made in protecting children's rights and recognize why it is so vital to continue fighting against all forms of exploitation in our own time. If you ever feel overwhelmed by difficult topics like this, or are struggling with your own mental health, please know there are people who want to help. Reaching out to a mental health professional or a support hotline can make a world of difference. Your well-being is important. Have you ever looked at old paintings of children and thought they looked like tiny, serious adults? Well, there's a reason for that. Childhood in ancient times was a world away from what we know today. It wasn't all sunshine and playgrounds. In fact, for many, it was incredibly tough. Let's start with a simple fact. There weren't many laws to protect children. Today, we have rules about child labor, education, and safety. Back then, not so much. The idea of a sheltered childhood, filled with play and learning, was a luxury reserved for the very, very wealthy. For most families, especially the poor, survival was a daily struggle. Every member of the family, including the children, had to contribute. From a very young age, kids were expected to work. If you were a farmer's son, you'd be out in the fields as soon as you could walk steadily. You'd learn to scare birds away from the crops, pull weeds, or tend to the smaller animals. A daughter might learn to spin wool, grind grain, or help her mother with cooking and cleaning from the age of 5 or 6. These weren't just chores. They were essential jobs that helped put food on the table. School. That was a dream for most. Reading and writing were skills for priests, scribes, or the aristocracy, not for the common child whose hands were needed for labor. Life was also incredibly precarious. Famines, diseases, and wars were constant threats. A bad harvest could mean starvation. An illness that we cure with simple antibiotics today could be a death sentence. Infant and child mortality rates were shockingly high. It was common for families to have many children, not just out of love, but with the grim understanding that not all of them would survive to adulthood. This harsh reality shaped the emotional landscape of the family. While parents certainly loved their children, the constant presence of loss might have led to a different kind of emotional bonding than we see today. Now, let's talk about something truly jarring to our modern minds. The idea of selling children. It sounds like something from a dark fairy tale, but it was a grim reality in many ancient societies. Why would anyone do this? It usually came down to desperation. Imagine your family is deep in debt, and you can't pay it back. In some cultures, a creditor could legally take your child as payment. Or perhaps a devastating war has ravaged your lands. Your family has lost everything and is on the brink of starvation. Selling a child, as heartbreaking as it was, might have been seen as the only way to ensure the rest of the family could survive, and maybe, just maybe, the child would have a better chance with a wealthier owner who could feed them. For the child, this was a catastrophic event that would be taken from their home, their parents, their siblings, everything they'd ever known. They became property. Slaves with no rights. Their connection to their family was severed, often forever. They could be sold again, taken to a faraway land, and forced to work in mines, quarries, or as domestic servants. Their entire identity was stripped away, replaced by the status of a slave. It is a chilling reminder of how vulnerable children were in a world that saw them, not just as young humans, but sometimes as economic assets or commodities. So, when we think about history, it's important to remember the little figures in the background, the children. Their lives weren't filled with toys and cartoons, but with hard work, uncertainty, and dangers we can barely imagine. Their experiences paint a fuller, more complex picture of what it was like to live in the ancient world. It really makes you appreciate the protections and opportunities that children have today. What do you think is the biggest difference? Have you ever wondered what it was really like to live in ancient Rome? We often imagine grand forums, powerful legions, and magnificent aqueducts, but beneath this veneer of civilization, there was a dark and brutal reality for millions of people. I'm talking about slavery, an institution that was as normal to the Romans as owning a car is to us today. In their world, human beings were bought and sold, just like any other tool or piece of property. They were commodities, listed in markets alongside livestock and pottery. For a slave in Rome, the concept of personal rights simply didn't exist. Their bodies, their labor, their very lives belonged to their owner. They could be worked to exhaustion, punished severely, or sold away from their families at a moment's notice. It was a life defined by the absolute power of another person. And while this was a horrific existence for any adult, it was unimaginably tragic for the most vulnerable victims. Children. How did a child even end up in this nightmare? The paths were numerous, and each one was heartbreaking. Many children were swept into slavery through the relentless expansion of the Roman Empire. When a Roman army conquered a new territory, the defeated population was often enslaved en masse. Entire familias, including children, would be captured and marched back to Roman territories to be sold. Imagine being a child, witnessing your home destroyed, your parents possibly killed, and then being dragged away to a foreign land where you don't even speak the language. This was the fate of countless children from Gaul, Germania, Britain, and beyond. They were spoils of war, their childhoods erased in an instant. But war wasn't the only way. The Roman world was also rife with poverty. For many families living on the brink of starvation, the choices were grim. In times of famine or economic hardship, some desperate parents faced an unthinkable decision: sell one of their own children into slavery to ensure the rest of the family could eat. It's a choice that's almost impossible for us to comprehend, but it was a desperate act of survival in a world with no social safety nets. These children were sold not out of a lack of love, but because of a devastating lack of options. Then there was the constant danger of kidnapping. Pirates and bandits roamed the seas and countryside, preying on the unprotected. Children playing too far from home or traveling on unsecured roads were easy targets. They would be snatched, bundled away, and sold at the nearest slave market, their families likely never knowing what happened to them. They simply vanished. And finally, there was debt. A family could fall into such deep debt that they were forced to offer a child as payment. This practice, known as debt bondage, meant a child's freedom was exchanged to settle a financial obligation. Once a child was sold, regardless of the reason, their old life was over. They entered a new world, a world of silence and total obedience. Their names were often changed, severing the last link to their past identity. They were trained for specific roles based on their age, gender, and perceived abilities. A young boy might be trained as a personal attendant, a craftsman's apprentice, or, tragically, for entertainment in the villas of the rich. A young girl could be destined for a life of domestic servitude, working in the kitchen, weaving, or caring for her master's children, a cruel irony as her own childhood was stolen from her. Their daily life was one of constant labor and fear. They had to learn their master's rules quickly, because disobedience could lead to brutal punishment. They had no one to protect them, no legal recourse, and no hope for escape. They lived under the constant threat of being sold again, separated from the few familiar faces they might have come to know in their new, harsh reality. The psychological toll must have been immense. This was the silent, hidden tragedy of Roma civilization built on the backs of enslaved people, including its youngest and most defenseless members. Thank you for joining me to explore this difficult but important part of history. It's a sobering reminder that welcome to our deep dive into the shadows of ancient Rome, where power wasn't just a privilege, it was a weapon. Imagine a world where the law bends for the wealthy, and the whims of an emperor could mean life or death for anyone. This wasn't a dystopian fantasy. This was the reality of the Roman Empire, a place where absolute power corrupted absolutely. Let's step back in time, not to the gleaming marble of the Senate, but into the hidden corridors of power where the true nature of Roman society was forged. At the very top stood the emperor, a figure whose authority was almost divine. His decisions were final, His word was law, and his displeasure could erase a family from history. Below him, a web of senators, governors, and wealthy elites competed for influence and favor. In this high-stakes game, morality was often the first casualty. Laws existed, yes, but they were a net designed to catch the small fish while the great sharks swam right through. For the powerful, justice was a commodity to be bought, and for the poor, it was a distant dream. The abuse of power wasn't just a political problem. It was woven into the very fabric of daily life. Let's visit a domus, the sprawling mansion of a Roman aristocrat. These weren't just homes. They were miniature kingdoms. From the outside, you'd see opulence and mosaics, fountains, and lush gardens. But inside, a different story unfolded. The entire estate ran on the silent, unending labor of enslaved people. They were the invisible engine of Roman luxury, with no rights, no freedom, and no voice. They cooked, they cleaned, they served, they catered to every desire of their masters, day and night. Their existence was entirely dependent on the mood of the household's patriarch. This absolute authority of the paterfamilias extended to everyone under his roof, not just the enslaved. His wife, his children, his extended family all were subject to his will. Roman society prized discipline and obedience above all else. Children were not raised to be freethinkers, but to be compliant cogs in the family machine. From a young age, they learned that questioning authority was not an option. Disobedience could be met with harsh punishment, reinforcing a culture where fear, not love, was the primary tool for maintaining order. This dynamic, a master ruling over his subjects, was a mirror of the empire itself, a macrocosm of the Roman household. The stories of emperors like Caligula and Nero are infamous for a reason. They represent the terrifying endpoint of unchecked power. Caligula, who allegedly planned to make his horse a consul, treated the state treasury as his personal piggy bank and executed senators on a whim. Nero, his successor, was no better, infamous for his extravagance, cruelty, and persecution of early Christians. These weren't just a few bad apples. They were the products of a system that gave a single man godlike authority with no accountability. When one person can decide the fate of millions without consequence, the potential for tyranny is limitless. The fear they inspired wasn't confined to the palace walls. It rippled through every layer of society, reminding everyone of their place in the rigid hierarchy. So, when we look at the grand monuments of Rome, the Colosseum, the aqueducts, the triumphal arches, it's crucial to remember the hidden cost. They were built on a foundation of control, inequality, and fear. The story of Rome is a powerful lesson, a timeless warning about the dangers of concentrating too much power in too few hands. It shows us that without checks and balances, without a voice for the powerless, and without a justice system that applies to everyone equally, any society, no matter how advanced or glorious, can fall into darkness. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the darker side of Roman history. If you found this exploration fascinating, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.